Anytime you want to get started, Lauren.
Alright. Earlier this school year, I was volunteering with Congregations for the Homeless, an organization that serves homeless people in the Bellevue area. And I realized that there was a huge controversy over where the new men's homeless shelter should be located. Currently, the proposed location is in Eastgate, which is a neighborhood in Bellevue. However, many people oppose this location. Some of the strongest voices in this debate attend Bellevue City Council meetings, such as the one shown in this photo. The people in the purple raising their hands are in opposition of the Eastgate location for the new men's homeless shelter. And some of the reasons they cite for this opposition is that they believe that it will decrease home values in the area, that the men will pose a threat to neighboring schools such as Bellevue College, and that they will bring illegal activity. Now, on the other side of this debate are the people in the red, and they are in support of the Eastgate location. Some of the reasons they use to support their stance are that they believe it will best provide for the growth of the homeless populations, considering it will be a permanent location, and they believe it will best provide services such as healthcare, psychological help, and future job and home placement. So as I was looking at the different perspectives in this issue, I became interested in how these people's opinions were formed. And so I started looking at the literature, and I found that there were many studies conducted on actual causes of homelessness in comparison to the stigma attached to why people become homeless. A study done by David Hartman found that actual causes of homelessness are usually a lack of low-cost housing and an inability to find a job. And these are usually structural barriers as opposed to personal choices. And this research could be related to Robert Agin's research that shows that more sympathetic people are more likely to feel that structural barriers as opposed to personal choices lead people to become homeless. And Kathy Stolle might have an explanation for Agin's research. She found that in a study of 200 people, after volunteering in a homeless shelter, people were more likely to worry less about homeless people, and they were more likely to speak positively of them. So the more sympathetic people that Agin speaks of could be more sympathetic because of their time spent volunteering. So as we can see, there is information about the causes of homelessness versus the stigma attached to why people become homeless, certain characteristics of people that lead them to become more understanding of why people become homeless, and finally, certain experiences such as volunteering with the homeless that lead them to speak more positively of the homeless populations in their area. And so I found that I was looking at this literature, there was a gap. And this gap is that there is little knowledge about how people's past experiences affect their opinions of the creation of a homeless shelter in their area. And that is why, for my research, I decided to analyze speakers at Bellevue City Council meetings to better understand how their past experiences with homelessness affect their stance on the Eastgate location and their reasons for that stance that they state in their speech at Bellevue City Council meetings. Now, initially, I was going to administer a questionnaire to people at Bellevue City Council meetings. However, after having an interview with Bellevue City Council member Lynn Robinson, I found that this might be somewhat unethical. And this is because a questionnaire might have implied that I was assuming that people who lack experience with homelessness oppose the Eastgate location only because of their lack of experience. And since this topic deals with touchy issues such as home values and school safety, I decided that it was best to distance myself from the people I was studying. And for that reason, I decided to do a case study with film analysis. So for my study, I watched 5 videos of past Bellevue City Council meetings and analyzed a total of 32 speakers. So at each Bellevue City Council meeting, there is anywhere between 6 and 10 people that are allowed to speak, and they speak for a maximum of 3 minutes. And so each time I watched a speech, I looked for 3 things: their stated experience with homelessness, their stance on the Eastgate location, so whether they supported it or opposed it, and finally, the reasons they used to support their stance on the Eastgate location. So as I was analyzing the speakers, I had a film analysis form, and you don't have to read all of these, but these are the 9 most common concerns and benefits surrounding the Eastgate location. And so each time a speaker stated either a benefit or a concern of the Eastgate location, I placed a tally mark next to that section. So my research was looking at, among people with a certain experience with homelessness, how does their past experience affect the reasons that they state? And I was looking at the most frequently stated reasons for that speaker group. I hypothesized that speakers who were recently homeless, which means they exited homelessness, would be most likely to support the Eastgate location, and they would most frequently state that the shelter will be monitored and healthcare as reasons for their support of the Eastgate location. I also hypothesized that speakers who fail to state their experience with homelessness, which does not necessarily imply that they lack experience, would be most likely to oppose the Eastgate location, and they would cite drug and alcohol issues and its low barrier status as reasons for their opposition. And a low barrier status means that men will be able to come in and out of the shelter with little restriction. And this really poses an issue for a lot of people in Bellevue, because some of these men might have criminal records, or they could be currently abusing drugs and alcohol. Alright, so after I analyzed the speakers, I broke them into 5 groups based on their past experience with homelessness. The first was directors of homeless shelters, and some of these people were board members of Imagine Housing or Congregations for the Homeless. Second group was volunteers at homeless shelters. The third was people who failed to state their experience with homelessness. Another group was people who had personal relationships with the homeless, so some of these people who had siblings who were homeless, or they were teachers of people who were homeless. And finally, the last speaker group were people who were recently homeless. And I found that all 3 of the people who were recently homeless that I analyzed, they had been through the shelter system in Bellevue. Alright, so I found that among the 32 speakers, 3 of them were recently homeless, and all 3 of those speakers supported the Eastgate location. I also found that they most frequently cited future home placement and health care as reasons for their support of the Eastgate location. And they cited this a mean value of 1.33 times per speaker. I also found that among the 32 speakers, 15 of them failed to state their experience with homelessness, and 10 out of those 15 opposed the Eastgate location. They most frequently cited illegal activity as a reason for their opposition, and this was stated a mean value of 0.7 times per speaker. For some other of my findings, I found that among people who have personal relationships with the homeless, half of them supported and half of them opposed the location, and as you can see in the orange below, these are their most frequently stated reasons for the support or opposition. Among volunteers at homeless shelters, 4 out of the 6 of them supported it, and 2 out of the 6 of them opposed. And finally, I found that among directors of homeless shelters, 3 out of the 4 of them supported the Eastgate location, and 1 out of the 4 of them opposed it. So as I was looking at my findings, I found something quite interesting. So the speaker groups that most frequently stated that they supported the Eastgate location were people who were recently homeless and directors of homeless shelters. However, the reasons they cited for their support differed. So among people who were recently homeless, they were most likely to state reasons that supported the Eastgate location that would directly benefit the men in the homeless shelter. Whereas among directors of homeless shelters, they were most likely to support their stance with reasons that would directly benefit the community. So for my research, we can see that my hypothesis was partly correct in that people who were recently homeless were most likely to support the Eastgate location. However, the reasons were not hypothesized correctly, and people who failed to state their experience were in fact most likely to oppose the Eastgate location. However, their reasons differed from my initial hypothesis. So for my research, it is important to acknowledge some limitations. The first has to do with the group that failed to state their experience with homelessness. So since it is not a requirement for people to state their experience with the topic that they're speaking of at a Bellevue City Council meeting, 15 out of the 32 people I analyzed did not state their experience. However, this does not necessarily imply that they lack experience, so if I were able to obtain this information, they could have potentially been placed in a different speaker group, and our mean values could have been different. Another limitation of my study was the ambiguity surrounding the number of tally marks placed in each section for the reasons that they cited. Some speakers briefly cited an issue, whereas other speakers talked about it more in depth, and so it was somewhat up to my discretion as to how many tally marks they received. And finally, the sample size of my study could be seen as a limitation. However, since I conducted a case study, I was only making a generalization about the people I was studying, so I feel it is somewhat fitting. Finally, my implications. So my study implies that people who have more experience with the services provided by a homeless shelter are most likely to support the Eastgate location. And so this study could serve as a basis for the Bellevue City Council to either solidify the Eastgate location or create a hearing for homeless people. So homeless people in the area might not have the means to attend Bellevue City Council meetings, and so I feel it's imperative for the Bellevue City Council to hear these voices. And since Bellevue is a more affluent area, wealthier voters who are not directly connected to the services that a homeless shelter provides, they might outnumber the voices of homeless people. And so I feel it's very important for the Bellevue City Council to create a hearing in order to understand these voices. Thank you.
Wow.
That was really good.
Reference page.
Could you put the images cited back up? That's
Yeah.
cool. Thank you. So, bravo. Well done, Lauren. Really nice job. And so, panel, would you take a moment to decide on a question? And who's going to start?
I feel like you covered everything so well. I'm
I know.
looking for something that you have
Do
already
you
covered.
see
on
why
here.
we often need a
Yeah.
moment or two afterwards?
Yeah.
So,
Just have to go for this one.
Well, I can go.
okay. You're going to go from the first group?
Yeah,
Okay.
if that's okay.
That's
You
the
guys
way we
want
do
to
it.
go?
Very nice.
Of course.
Okay. Well, Lauren, I was very impressed with your all of your sources of information that you mentioned. Which source would you consider to be the most important while you were conducting your research, and why was that one the most important to you?
So I think the most important source that I found was a study done by Kathy Stoley, and she conducted a study with 200 people at Weston College, and she interviewed them before and after volunteering at a homeless shelter for 2 weeks, and she found that after volunteering, people were much more likely to speak more positively of homeless people and have less worry about them in their community. And so this was really important because it led me to question how people's past experiences, not only their experience with homelessness, but other factors, lead them to feel about certain issues that have to do with homeless people.
Thank you.
Okay, well, because you covered pretty much everything in depth of understanding, I guess this is all that's really left is, what additional questions emerged during your research? Based on your experience, what advice would you give to other researchers who might choose to investigate those questions?
So some of the other questions that came up had to do with the different factors that led people to feel a certain way about the Eastgate location. So this might be factors such as where the person lives, or how many children they have, or if their children go to school in the Bellevue school district, because this could really change their opinions about the location of the Eastgate homeless shelter. And also some additional questions could be how this same study might play out in a different area, because people in that area might have different experiences with homelessness.
Interesting. Okay. Wonderfully done. really appreciate the work behind this. My question is for you, Lauren. What unanticipated turn did you encounter as your research progressed? What were the reasons for the change in direction or focus, if that occurred? And how did you modify your method or approach because of it?
So, I had an unanticipated turn when I had a meeting with Bellevue City Council member Lynn Robinson, and she actually gave me a huge binder of complaints that people had compiled surrounding the Eastgate location, and she actually told me that I might become a target if I were to go to Bellevue City Council meetings and administer questionnaires. And so, although I had created questionnaires, I had to deal with this by picking a different method, and so I decided to do film analysis, and this helped me to distance myself from the people I was researching, and to do it in a more ethical way.
It's a great response. Thank you.
Lauren, I'm really glad, I'm going to turn this off.